tree steward education program, the first since I joined the tree steward board. And we're very excited to have Rod Simmons with us tonight to talk about preserving oak diversity in Northern Virginia. Rod is the Natural Resource Manager and Plant Ecologist for the city of Alexandria. He's extensively surveyed the flora and plant communities of the Mid-Atlantic region. He's a member of the Virginia Botanical Association and works closely with the Virginia and Maryland Natural Heritage programs. And he's a frequent lecturer on native plants, natural communities, stream restoration, and other related topics. And I just like to say on a personal note that my first meeting with Rod was on a rainy Friday a couple of years ago before the pandemic, when I was asked as a Sierra Club representative to participate in a walk around a neighborhood of Fairfax County south of the Beltway called Hollins Hill. And one of these stream restorations was being promoted by Fairfax County to reduce the phosphorus and going into the bay. And this woman came in determined to explain how ripping out these trees and putting in, stuff to slow the water flow was really what needed to be done. And Rod was totally unimpressed and kept pointing out why, yeah, you could do a little here and a little there, but no need to come ripping out trees. And then I've, of course, seen how he has worked to support the to prevent the bulldozing of 200 trees in Taylor Run in Alexandria. So I know that Rod is passionate about the environment, and I wasn't aware until recently that he was also an expert on oaks. And so I would like to welcome Rod and hear what he has to tell us.
Thank you, Paul and Nora, and it's great to be here in the virtual world, but doing this presentation. It's a good one, and I've done one sort of similar to the different organizations, some on, but all really aiming at preserving remnant forest trees, and most of the forest trees that we have in our suburban neighborhoods and urban areas are oak and oak hickory forests, remnants, upland forests. Most of the stream valleys and lowland areas have been are not as commonly preserved. You can see here's the title slide here. Alexander Benjamin of the city of Alexandria arborists with on the Seminary Hill, High Hill Terrace in city of Alexandria, and there's a lot of oak diversity. So just to keep this kind of idea in mind, this picture in mind as we go through. Just a reminder that, folks know this, but native plants are those that occur locally and naturally without direct or indirect human intervention. They've co-evolved with animals and microorganisms for millennia, each occupying its particular niche and collectively supporting ecosystem diversity, health, and resiliency. And of course, much of the entire eastern United States is part of the eastern deciduous forest biome. So all these different types of forest and woodlands and glades and such are all part of that larger ecological community. There's a lot of folks have the mistaken idea that we've trashed nature. We've done damage, but and that there's nothing left. But to the contrary, and and especially surprisingly around large cities. There's many thousands of acres of tens of thousands of acres of really high quality natural areas, many of them globally rare. Of course, there are increasingly threats in the form of disturbance and habitat loss, such as Paul was talking about, and one example. And then lots of new threats, such as non-native invasive plants, insects, diseases, and climate change. This greater region, the presentation tonight focuses on the Northern Virginia area, mainly the counties Prince William, Stafford, Prince William, Fairfax, Loudoun, Fauquier, and up to the Blue Ridge, but not beyond the Blue Ridge, and the city of Alexandria in Arlington County, and DC, and then suburban Maryland up to Baltimore. This is areas, the most geologically and floristically diverse area in the eastern United States, probably in the nation, but certainly in the top 10 in the nation, but in the eastern United States. Urban and suburban areas around these old fall line or fall zone cities contain the largest number and variety of old age trees and remnant stands. These were protected from logging long ago, most of them. You can see these red dots basically are the large fall zone cities coming down from Newark through Philadelphia, Baltimore, DC. You can see the little diamond around DC, or at least the upper part of it. Fredericksburg is the smallest dot that's on the Rappahannock, and then the Richmond is down on the James below. Of course, the fall line extends north and south of there. The preserving oak diversity, and we'll include hickory, upland hickories as well. And you can throw black gum and beech in there as well, but let's keep to mainly we'll just keep oaks as a broad category. That goes hand in glove with preserving whatever exists of the remnant forest soil, and along with that, the soil microorganisms and the fungi and the native plants and animals that occur there, and many places have that these as remnants on their properties throughout the region, and that's a good place to start as far as preserving oak biodiversity in the region. And a lot of it is a form of a remnant woodland glade, which is basically what emerges after the shrubs and the understory and the ground layer of a forest floor are removed, but the soil is largely intact, because the way they used to build homes in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and maybe up to the 60s, most of our housing developments in the past, they spared as many trees as possible, sometimes very right up to the foundation of the home. They hand dug these very carefully. These they didn't hand dig the foundation, but they carefully dug them. Some homes don't have basements, of course, a lot of them don't. Back in those days, trees were important. You really couldn't sell a home if it was denuded of trees back then. It's the opposite now, of course, but because people are so disconnected from nature and from trees. So the importance of not using fertilizers and pesticides, the many benefits of keeping some areas natural and not planting and mulching every square inch of ground. There's really no need to go out and gussy up one's property to sterilize it. In short, is what's really happening. There's some people, again, don't care for that, but a lot of people do care about their trees, and they do want to be able to grow certain native plants, and they don't want a traditional lawn, and yet they don't know where to go and how to do that very well, because there's a lot of things involved. One of the most important things is absolutely no chemicals, and that includes fertilizers. Fertilizers are not needed. They're only used to grow grass. But grass grows perfectly fine on its own and with good light and good moisture. Other than that, it's just another it's really intended. Fertilizers are for agriculture, not for gardening, for vegetable gardening, but not for plant gardening. These native lawns and savanna-like glades, basically, they require very little maintenance as opposed to the chemically treated traditional lawns. One of the words for them some folks have is freedom lawn. That pretty much means that weeds and the whatever native plants and in there, and you don't really care about a manicured lawn that's all grass. And that was really the first, back in the 80s and 90s, this redesigning the American lawn was by folks at Yale, Borman and others, was a big early movement in this. We're going to go a few steps beyond that because we're favoring the remnant native glades, which are almost entirely native species. So we're gonna manage to remove or to suppress the non-native invasive plants. So this presentation is really all about the careful stewardship of existing natural conditions that remain. If you don't have natural conditions, you can create them by not artificializing your property or chemicalizing it. Environmental costs of lawns. I'm not going to go through all these, and just a note, all this text. Some of these slides are text heavy, and I put them in there so that the references are there for folks to look at a later time. This is being recorded, so folks can have this stuff as an archival reference. And so I'm not going to read every line. We all know the enormous environmental cost of maintaining artificial lawns, such as the two images on the left here of the frame, especially the bottom left. You can see that's really a dead zone. That there's that property owner just consistently applies weed and feed on that. The grass is sort of it's not even healthy, even by grass standards. It's pale. It's having a hard time surviving in that shade with all that chemical. You can't use chemicals to replace sunlight. And what grass really wants is, most grasses, certainly lawn grasses, want sunlight. That's why the top grass is much, much healthier. And of course, all those chemicals and fertilizers greatly affect the trees, the roots of the trees and the trees themselves. And by basically killing off the living horizon of the soil, which is always the top several inches. Most lawns are ecological dead zones. They all heard about the insect apocalypse. Where have all the insects gone? Important to remember, insects, soil microorganisms, and plants form the foundation of the ecosystem. That's it. You get rid of any of those three, they all operate together, as we saw on the first slide about the coevolution of life, basically, on Earth, and we're part of that as well. At least in the formative years. We're in the exploitative years now, but we're certainly part of that as well. We just don't give it a thought much. But any of these three, they all fit together, and you can always tell a healthy site or area by finding these things. Negative effects of traditional lawn establishment and maintenance. Again, no fertilizers, lime, pesticides, destroys the foundation of the ecosystem. That's a lot of what Doug Tallamy is departing from, or coming from. Also, the need to use native species as opposed to ecologically valueless non-native species, whether they're exotic or whether they're invasive or not. Really, you certainly don't want to use invasive.
The dogs will eat the chickens, and
What do you mute?
Could you please mute yourself?
Please, yes. So, yeah, somebody needs to mute.
oh,
That is, thanks.
Yeah. all right, there's someone. All right, I just was.
Can somebody
checking in
mute,
and,
please? Whoever that is, mute.
We can't mute them.
And
They
I'm
have,
glad that at least they showed up and did what they need to do today. And
And yeah, they're just chatting away.
could
here.
everybody make sure that they're on mute so that
Did you
when they
eat
have to
enough?
answer phone calls, they don't need to interrupt our presentation?
It's Matt Peterson who's talking.
Well, he or she is obviously not listening.
Yep. Unfortunately, thank you. It messes up the recording as well, but people expect that sort of thing. These are some ideas for how to be a good steward to your property, and some ideas for establishing or supplementing native lawns. Now, folks probably think, gee, what's thought the topic was oak preservation. Well, it is, because under the oaks are these lawns, and it can either be a destructive ornamental lawn, or it can be a natural savanna glade, or lawn in quotes, as far as alternative native lawn. And the alternative lawns, the native lawn will help preserve oak trees, even in the face of climate change. So oaks, I'll get to that in a second. It's also important to control non-native invasive plants, or they will quickly overrun a site. This includes arguing for funding at a large scale jurisdictions to control invasive plants in large tracts of forest and wetlands and waterways, but also very important to do so on one's home property. Why are oaks so important? And this is stemming from Talamy, of course, but there's a lot of reasons. First and foremost is the greater DC region and the Mid-Atlantic is an area of tremendous oak diversity. And the the oaks are the dominant tree species, canopy tree species in the Mid-Atlantic, and they comprise most of our upland forests and a number of bottomland forests as well, but they're most prevalent in the upland forests, and there's many types of oak dominated forests, and they produce an enormous amount of insects, mainly caterpillars, that are crucial for interior forest birds and tropical migrants, warblers and such, to for their life histories to survive. That's why one of the reasons Doug Talamy is so focused on the oaks. And so it's very important to preserve what we have, but also to plant oaks, hickory where appropriate. Beech is doing pretty well on its own, so I'm not gonna, even though it's in the title of the slide, I'm not gonna, it's really the oaks that need to be planted, hickories as well, and where appropriate. But overarching that is the concept of right plant, right place. Depends what kind of oak you're using, and you want to match it to the right habitat, not just horticulturally, but certain species of oak fit in with the forest community type, and beyond aesthetics or matching it to the habitat horticulturally, you want to make sure that you keep the integrity of the forest the community by planting the right species of oaks. And these are the upland oaks I'm talking about, that are so important for wildlife. In other words, it's not the bottomland oaks or the lowland oaks that are generally that are as important for wildlife as the upland oaks. We're going to go through all the upland oaks in a minute, and all the oaks in our region. But so that's important to know. So that it's not just like, okay, let's just plant oaks wherever we can find them, whatever they may be. The nursery industry grows a lot of oaks. Some of them are enormously inappropriate for our area. They got lazy, and for some odd reason, the nursery industry starting to offer. They've been for 2 decades now. Nuttall's oak. That's a deep Gulf Coast state plant. It's a pin oak, almost identical to a northern pin oak, Quercus palustris, but Quercus nattalii, the Nuttall's oak, should never be planted, even though a lot of nurseries sell it, a lot of jurisdictions plant it mindlessly. A lot of jurisdictions really don't have a good bead on any of this. They don't have a good appreciation for it. Which is a big problem, because there's a lot of fighting, a lot of effort and energy wasted trying to get the jurisdictions to plant the right material. We shouldn't be planting things like bald cypress and ginkgos and whatever up in our uplands, and we shouldn't be planting bottomland oaks, swamp oaks in the uplands either, just because they're easy and available. So remember that as we go along. We don't want to be planting swamp white oak and swamp chestnut oak and lyre leaf oak, pin oaks. Pin oaks seed around pretty readily, lots of places. And they do occur in upland depression swamps, like willow oak. So those two are okay. But when you're planting inappropriate material, you're robbing the habitat and the space for the appropriate plant. And the appropriate oaks are readily available in the sizes, and they grow just as well. Just needs some guidance, and the guidance comes from presentations like this and from the tree stewards. It's sadly absent from a lot of jurisdictions. They're, not really focused in exactly this direction. Few aspects of upland oak, hickory, and beech biology. This is from Richard Murray, arborist and tree biology notebook author. That's a great book, by the way. You can go on Abe Books or whatever and just Google the title, it'll come right up, and it's really excellent. It's written, it's a lot of local examples. It's everything you want to know about tree biology is in there. It's really a beautifully done book. It's not expensive. Basically, again, this is all about protecting the soil, the soils, the soil microorganisms, and the roots of the tree and such. Remember that in a forest, as well as in a property, the living horizon is the top few inches. Everything below that of the soil, everything below that is inert subsoil. Roots do go into it to a degree if they can. If it's hard pan clay, they generally don't much, but they do penetrate much of some of the subsoil, but they're not feeding in that. They're anchored in that. They're what keeps the forest and the trees alive is that living horizon of the top few inches of the soil. It's the litter, the duff, the soil microorganism. It's all laying there like it is vast network on top of the subsoil, and it gets renewed each year. Obviously from in the deciduous forest, and it's important that that material be allowed to return to the soil and not be just blown off into piles and sterilized from the yard. Here's a couple of examples of what these native alternative lawns look. This is Arlington Forest in Arlington County, of course. Most of this is poverty oak grass. There's a lot of carex in there. Carex umbellata is the most common one. And low diminutive native plants, wildflowers, and then a lot of bryophytes. This community it's on a flat terrace, hard pan terrace. Some of these trees are thriving. The forest, this area is sort of regenerating. Arlington County ceased mowing here years ago, and now there's a lot of successional aspects in there, mostly Virginia pine. There is some oak regeneration. This is an old pasture that never farmed. So remember that soil disturbance brings not only invasive exotic plants, but it also destroys the soil structure and does serious damage to not only to roots, but to the soil itself. And remember, the soil is what's keeping everything alive, not because it's fertile, but because it's bioactive. There's a really nice glade. Nobody does anything here except mow it just a few times a year. This is opposite, or on the grounds of Williamsburg Middle School. This is an acidic oak hickory forest. You can see there's a pignut in the top left of the slide there. Nice swales, functions as a rain garden, water control. Again, the same characteristic plants. That's pretty much what, if you're lucky enough to have that, some yards do. But it's a really very healthy situation, and that's what's keeping this woodland glade or savanna alive and thriving. So along those lines, the top left here was just all grass on basically on subsoil, because where the house is, the top left, this is Reserve Hill opposite Knights of Columbus off Little Falls Road in Arlington County. But when they built the road here, the housing development in the early 50s, they just to make a street, they didn't take the street on top of the terrace or the hilltop. It's not a terrace, it's a hill. They just plowed a sort of like a canal through the hilltop, and it's about 12 feet down from the hilltop. So basically exposed all the subsoil. And this is an acidic oak hickory forest here. So it had a lot of weedy grass and some English ivy and pachysandra, junk like that. That was all removed, dug out. And to create a natural woodland floor with the organic material naturally occurring with whatever falls, it's trapped. There were a lot of stones were placed here, rescued from construction sites. There are no problem finding them around the county. That's important because it helps, it held the material in. It also holds the water in place. Not much grows in subsoil. And like I was saying earlier, so it took a few years for a very thin landscape here for the to build up this healthy wood forest floor. About 10 years actually, and maybe not quite that much, maybe 7 or 8. And once that happened, then it's like a fire. It just catches on, and it takes care of itself. And the wildlife, there's lots of wildlife in here. There's salamanders, there's snakes, there's all kinds of stuff lives in here, and most importantly, the fireflies and things like that. So across the street is a very sterile yard, and they even have a mosquito service that comes. And in summertime, early summer, there'll be loads of fireflies in this property, but zero in the chemicalized one. This is on the preserving the oak diversity. A lot of times one doesn't have to go source oaks for their property. You want to, if you have parent trees around, and you are in an oak forest, or a former oak or oak hickory forest, you're going to have seedlings and saplings like the one below, the black oak here, and you don't need to have many of them, but you want to leave some of those intact, and because they'll be your future replacement for the parent trees. And on the right here is a chestnut oak sapling that came in with a rescued. I rescued a wild azalea from a development site years ago. The azalea was about that tall, about 12 feet tall, 10 feet tall, 12 feet tall, and then it died down, as they always do when they're moved. It's still there, but what sprouted up was the chestnut oak, and so it too is going to be a replacement tree for a large oak that died many years ago near the steps on this hill. Top left of this is on the left half of the photo is a sweet pignut hickory, and that's a volunteer sapling. It's probably a 5 or 6 year old volunteer. It's pretty fast growing, and so that's certainly a good one. Bottom left is a cool property in Arlington Forest. You can see to the right they removed all the English ivy off their white oak, their parent white oak, and then what they've left is their front yard is basically a complete thicket of on both sides of the sidewalk up to the house are white oak saplings in there. So it's a nice little nursery, but it's a cool, you know, they certainly have many replacements for the terrace. And if you don't replace them with in a place like these oak dominated neighborhoods, by just getting rid of everything or having grass, the parent trees will die off eventually. Most of them will, and because a lot of them are old and mature, and then when they grew, they were growing in a forest. They sprouted in what was a forest 80 to 100 to 120 to 150 years ago, and that forest no longer exists. These old neighborhoods that were built in the forest 70 years ago still maintain enough of that native soil to where the community still defines the landscape. And so this is an important way to get replacements. The right side here is on top of Reserve Hill again. This is a 10-year-old planted Scarlet Oak. It's probably maybe 15, 16, 17-year-old tree because it was large. It was, you know, probably 10 feet when it was planted, 10 feet tall. Now it's probably 25 feet tall now. And it was planted right in the almost in the cavity of a 120-year-old Scarlet Oak that blew down in Hurricane Sandy. So this is a 1-for-1 replacement. And that gets us back to the concept. It's very important to maintain this upland oak forest connectivity by planting the oaks, the right plant, right place, the characteristic foundational oaks back in the landscape when we lose them. Some folks go to red maple or something like that. Red maple is not a canopy tree in upland oak forest, and it doesn't serve much ecosystem function or value. Fine tree where it is naturally in bottomlands, but it's you know, they want to replace what is characteristic. So native oak species of Northern Virginia and Greater DC region, we've got 9 white oak species. Macrocarpa, the bur oak, is very rare. That's more of a Ohio, Midwestern Ohio Valley plant. It was planted in the 1870s around, you know, here. It was USDA or nursery, the forestry agencies really were promoting it for its large fruits. White oak is our most common oak, you know, across the board in the Mid-Atlantic. Some of these are specialized. Some of these white oaks are very specialized. For instance, Quercus bicolor is swamp white oak. That's bottomland tree. Quercus lyrata even more so. That's more of a southeastern bottomland tree. Some of them are very rare habitats, like the dwarf chinkapin oak, Quercus brinoides. Quercus muhlenbergii is a calciphile. The 11 red oak species that are native. These are just the species, not the interspecific hybrids. But here's what top left. This is a lot of these trees have died off, and this whole property was just pretty much wiped out. But for a long time, that was what was a really nice property along Route 7 or Broad Street in the city of Falls Church. Nice assemblage of typical characteristic upland oaks here, white, black, and chestnut. Parcroft Apartments, top right. That's all white oak there with that reddish brown orange color. One of the big, that's been in the news the past year. There's a lot of remnant forest trees on that, and glades and groves on that large property. And it's a shame when we gentrify these places and we sell them off. The trees get cut down, or people want grass and they want cherry trees or other inanities, and so ornamental cherries. So basically the forest is pretty much wiped out. Bottom right is the characteristic bark of the deeply furrowed bark of the chestnut oak, Quercus montana, and bottom left is the fairly common natural hybrid between white oak and the chestnut oak. That's called Saul's oak, and it's exactly intermediate between the two parent species. Post oak, top left, Quercus stellata. Top right is the fall color of the post oak. And bottom left is the natural hybrid, fairly common, again, these are old hybrids of the post oak and white. And that's called Furnow's oak. And there's a lot of hybridization. Arlington County and City of Alexandria, DC, have a lot of natural hybrids of oaks. They're really dense oak forests. Even the bottomlands in both counties, both jurisdictions are oak dominated, which is interesting. Same for DC. And so what you have repeated selective logging and clearing with a lot of trees left behind. And basically when these forests were opened up to wind, these are wind pollinated, and you get a lot of crossing. And not all oaks, like a lot of living things, don't all cross randomly. For instance, the red oak group and the white oak group don't cross, and then there's a lot of species that don't cross with each other easily either. Got the bottom right is the black oak, big, thick, leathery leaves. That's Quercus volupna. That tree, you usually find that almost always on west-facing slopes in the uplands. It's a light-demanding tree. Quercus falcata, top left, southern red oak or Spanish oak. That's got the falcate terminal leaf lobe. And top right, you can see that glossy, you can see the different colors. The southern red is not glossy, and it's not dark green generally. It can be dark green, but it's more olive green, like the picture top left. You can see the natural hybrid between it and black oak is the Waldenau's oak, and you can see both parents in that very well, and especially the leathery, glossy, thick leaf of the black oak in there with the pattern and the shape of the southern red. Blackjack oak, Quercus marylandica. There used to be a lot more of that around. It's a light demanding species too. It lost a lot of its habitat. It's an woodland edge, forest edge species, or a dominant or a co-dominant species in places like serpentine barrens. What's happened, what in turn you see is just as much of the hybrid, the Bush's oak, which is Quercus x bushii. That's a fairly common natural hybrid between blackjack oak and black oak, and its leaves are against its bark on the bottom right there. And blackjack oak can be rounded somewhat, or a round lobe like the one on the left, bottom left, or sort of more sharply lobed. You know that you all know that the red oak group has bristles on its leaf lobes at the ends of the lobes, bristle tipped, and white oak has none. White oak occasionally will have glandular tips, but they're not bristles. Up left is scarlet oak, brilliant fall color. Bottom left is a northern red oak, which has a broad leaf that's not very shallowly, that's not deeply lobed. Northern red oak is a massive tree. There's one huge specimen here, old age specimen at Plummer's Island, at the top of Plummer's Island at Cabin Knoll. Northern red oak, these two trees couldn't be, their life histories couldn't be more dissimilar. Scarlet oak is a light demanding, not long lived tree of the of uplands. It maxes out at around 120 years, 100 years, maybe 120, fast growing. Northern red oak is not terribly long lived either, although it lives longer than that. It does not grow in the uplands except unless you're in the mountains in certain places, or in flat woods like in the Triassic Basin, like in Runnymede Park, or the diabase communities. You'll find it in these flat woods, what they call these flat woods in the Triassic Basin. But where northern red oak really develops its size and grows is along the stream banks and the mesic mixed hardwood forest. And its companion trees are tulip tree and beech, and some of the other mockernut hickory and some of the other trees of mesic mixed hardwood forests. That's why you don't want to plant right place. You want to make sure you don't if you plant a northern red oak on a terrace top, North Ridge, or Arlington Forest, it's not going to be happy, and it's not going to. It may grow fairly quickly, but it's going to start to fall apart pretty soon, because it just can't take the heat and the heat and the drought. So some rare natural hybrids of the red oak group. You've got the rarest is this Quercus x incomita. Doesn't even have a common name. I've just seen that once. It's growing in city of Alexandria at Beverly Park. And there's one near in Lyon Park near there in Arlington County. Both doing fine. It's a tough tree. That's a hybrid between blackjack oak and southern red oak. Bottom left is Bender's oak. That tree can get massive because it's got Quercus rubra, a northern red oak, which is a massive tree, given the right site. You can see the deep lobing of the deep sinuses of scarlet oak in there. And it's pretty nice. And you need the fruit really to make a good ID on these things, but yeah, it's intermediate between the two parents. City of Alexandria used to have had 2 champion trees. They died of old age. Remember it's got Scarlet Oak in it, so it's not going to live terribly long. Generally, the Quercus rubra genes will give it some longevity, but depends how much of the rubra the tree is drawing from. And then Arlington County, we found one along at Barcroft Park, a nice, good-sized one. That tree is now gone. So the only remaining one I know of in Arlington and Alexandria is in the chapel in the woods at Bethel Hebrew Congregation, just right on the Seminary Terrace, right across from Virginia Theological Seminary. And a pretty rare hybrid is the Hawkins oak, which is the bottom right. That's between northern red and the black oak. Some of the natural hybrids of the red oak group, a lot of them with willow oak. Willow oak is really a great tree. Again, I don't really mind just seeing it up in an upland, but I wouldn't recommend planting it there. It's tough enough to where it will actually thrive for a long, long time. But it really should be in the bottomland lowlands. The top right is a really interesting looking thing. A lot of people think this is the shingle oak, Quercus imbricaria, but it looks a lot like it. But it's not. It's a rare natural hybrid between blackjack oak and willow oak. And remember, willow oak gets into the Piedmont it's a coastal plain tree, but it does get into the Piedmont in certain situations where it can compete, like upland depression swamps in the Triassic Basin. You also find it in some old Pleistocene relics in the Potomac Gorge, and it moves around. So and it's certainly in the intercoastal plain and in the fall zone in certain places. So it moves around. It can provide the genetic material for the hybrid. Pretty common hybrid is the Bartram's oak, Quercus heterophila, that's bottom left. A lot of these things look alike, so you need to look at the buds on them and the fruit. Most of the fruit comes out looking like the willow oak, which has got that characteristic very small acorn. But sometimes you'll find a large acorn. There's a huge old Bartram's oak below on the Rock Creek Parkway, below the Shoreham in a park there in the open, and it's got large fruits like the northern red oak. It's one of its parents. Quercus falcata and Fellows, that's called Quercus subfalcata. And then a rarer one is the Quercus filialis. That's between the willow oak and the black oak. Of course, the bottom right is just straight species willow oak. Upland oaks of specialized habitats. These are things that most homeowners really won't have to or shouldn't be dealing with. This is basically, we preserve this diversity, biodiversity, and this species by preserving the land, which we have done. All these images here are of large tracts of globally rare forest communities that have been preserved in perpetuity. So the top left, we've got an old age Muhlenberg oak or Chinkapin oak, Quercus muhlenbergii, And then in this area of the Shellmore Ravine Forest and the calcareous marine sands, and at Chapman Forest, Chapman State Park in Charles County, just 21 miles south of DC. Quercus muhlenbergii is a tree of the mountains, of the limestone areas of the mountains up around Antietam and places like that. Its close relative is the image below in the right. That's Quercus crinoides, the dwarf chinkapin oak, which looks just exactly like pretty much like the chinkapin oak, except muhlenbergii, except this one is very, very small. This is really a shrub for the most part. And another like it is the bear oak, Quercus ilicifolia. And those two grow in a variety of habitats. Find them in the mountains a lot. They're northern trees. But here they grow in the pine barrens, and we have the southernmost extent of the New Jersey pine barrens, northern coastal Atlantic pine barrens, here in Prince George's County, Maryland, at the Beltsville Agricultural Research Center and at Patuxent Research Refuge. Bottom right is a tree that folks didn't know of in this area in the past. It's Pagoda Oak. Used to be a variety, considered a variety of Southern red, but it's actually its own species. It's a massive bottomland oak of the Southeast, and it reaches its northern limits here in our area, DC area. Actually, Southern Maryland. This is from Chapman. This is the Maryland State Champion at Chapman Forest. And that's Richard Murray there, the tree biology notebook author. And a lot of his photos and text were from all the oaks that he found at Chapman Forest. So just quickly here, this is a way to, if you want to look at these hybrids, there's more of them too. You can look at them close up from your computer. The instructions are here. The City of Alexandria Herbarium contains a large digitized collection of most of the oak species and natural hybrids in the Mid-Atlantic region. And it's probably the best collection of that's available. And recently, George Mason University Herbarium, GMUF, is on the same, they're also on the CERNIC portal. And they have, the Lord Fairfax Community College accessioned about 20,000 specimens from their collection, their defunct herbarium, to George Mason. And those, I believe those have all been scanned and uploaded as well. And so there's a lot of oak hybrids there as well to look at. And so those two herbaria, the City of Alexandria Herbarium, ABCH, and George Mason University Herbarium, are two really good opportunities to look at these things close up by just scrolling through the collections. And of course, you go to, when you get down to, you click on Figaceae, which is the beech family, and oaks are part of the beech family. And you go to, you get to the oaks there, and you can look through them and get a better sense of some of these the intricacies of these natural hybrids. Lastly, there's a lot of talk about, we can hit some of these things in the question, the questions that come up about should we be planting southern species, because with climate change, everything is going to turn into the south here anyway. We're going to end up looking like North Carolina or South Carolina soon, and that's not a given. And what people need to remember is the oaks the oak forests and the oak pine forests and the oak hickory forest that we have all got here. They were favored by these long droughts and these tough conditions that we have in a lot of these upland forest communities, be it pine barrens, be it serpentine barrens, vast oak heath forests that we have, etc. So all these species are perfectly equipped to tolerate whatever climate change effects there are in store. The one thing they can't tolerate, though, is disturbance, chemicals. They can weather the threats of climate change, and with the heat island effect and urbanization, which is really what's causing the trouble that we've seen with the white oaks and the chestnut oaks mainly, but not with when I mean white oak, I mean white oak, Quercus alba, and Quercus montana. I don't mean post oak. Post oak I've not seen any problems with post oak. So that's what this slide here is to show. This is the driest oak type, I think, on soil, not sand, that I know of. That I think in the eastern U.S., except maybe some places, the Florida sands and some pine barren areas where you have turkey oak or whatever, and they may get more moisture than this one here does. This is very dry, it's a heat island in itself. Southwest facing slopes and ridges, it's just really dry. There's temperature is 100 degrees. This is a droughty area, and it's shortleaf pine that's on the right there. Yellow pine is another word for it. Pinus echinata, and post oak is dominant. And a lot of the railroad ties and packing crates and such, probably some of the maybe some of the old lumber that was used in these old homes from the 40s and 50s is post oak from the Ozarks area. And it's almost a monoculture. So folks who are saying, well, gee, we've got to create this artificial diversity of you can't have too much of one oak, you can't do too much, don't want to have mostly oaks, don't want to have this. Well, this community is really just a few, just on one hand, it's probably like 3 or 4 characteristic canopy dominance, and that's it. And it just stretches for, hundreds and hundreds of miles in all directions. And so we find that in nature. You do have functioning areas that are naturally sparse. A lot of people look at our chestnut oak uplands and they think that, gee, why don't we have anything on the ground here? Well, it's naturally sparse, but very biodiverse, at least as far as the soil is concerned, community. And so we don't want to add, these artificial, these concepts that are not sound science. It's artificial diversity, and we don't want to apply that to the natural world. We don't want to create a nursery lot or our 10 favorite trees in here. These things function as a whole, and a lot of what is keeping these trees alive is what's you can't see. It's below the ground. Again, we have to respect that and preserve that. That said, if as using these things as street trees, I think they'd make great street trees. Some of them in areas where you have at least a real soil, not construction rubble and waste. So this is an example of trees, native oaks and pine that perfectly adapted to heat and drought stress. which are the two common, the most common threats with climate change. So absolutely no, it's wrong. It's not a best practice to move plants around. It's not, let them come naturally up this way, if they will, but no, we don't want to artificially move things around. So with that last frame in mind here, we've got this, there's a blackjack oak along an old one. It's a little guy, but it's right along the high terrace, the highest point in Alexandria, Seminary Terrace here. This is where we had a lot of blackjack oaks. There's still a good number, a few of them there. A lot of Bush's oak. And then there's a lot of post oak up there. And the frame at the right is the city champion post oak. And that was just pruned. But it wasn't, those were, the limbs were broken. They weren't, they were gratuitously pruned. It wasn't necessary. And then the bottom left there is the, we had a lot of the the shortleaf pine, the old convalescent camp. That's at Jenny's Lane. Just, in the area between MacArthur Elementary and up towards where it meets, turns into Seminary Road, where it meets Quaker. And we had a lot of remnant shortleaf pine in there in big stands. And again, ignorance, the people who bought the homes, the lots, they're large lots there, they cut them down because they wanted to put in a lawn and a pool and inane plants. Just sheer ignorance. They had no idea of what they had. I mean, shortleaf pine. Going back to the just to write a quick note on the people ask about why is my white oak dying, or my oak tree dying off, and you've got these and they're pruning large limbs. Each time you do that, the tree has basically formed itself. It needs those branches to regulate its moisture, and without moisture, it gets seriously stressed. And I don't mean whatever. It forms its own moisture regime in there, and I don't mean just what goes up and down the vascular system in the roots from the roots. It's the trees transpire, and they have to maintain that, or else they lose it. So if someone were, if a lousy arborist were to come in and say, or as I say, a mercenary company would come in and say, let's shape this thing, or I think I want to get more room around my whatever for some light, and they just start whacking limbs off these things. Two things that happen: you're increasing 10, 20, 30 fold the evaporative rate of the tree, the leaves of the tree, and stressing it enormously. By doing that, the tree balances itself with those limbs against wind shear. The roots, think of it as more of like a tightrope walker. It's balancing itself. It needs the upper part of it to keep itself rooted. It's not the roots that are keeping the tree entirely balanced, by no means. And then think of the tree as a giant hydraulic pump, and or an engine, and those upper branches, the upper trunk is the part of the engine, and that's what's pulling the moisture up. And when you whack off, when you need to take chunks of the engine out or the pump out, what happens. So a lot of issues there that folks don't think about. And then you add in heat and drought and ground ozone, high ground ozone levels, and you've got a perfect storm.
Rod, I think
Yes.
we want to leave
Yep,
some. time.
we are
Great,
done.
You are
So
done.
I just
So
want to
we
just,
have-
here's Doug Talamy here as far a nice, he's getting increasingly fiercer about, and I appreciate it, his reminders and admonishments. And then I just wanted to say there are only 3 rules for saving species: save habitat, save habitat, save habitat.
Mhm.
That's deceased Smithsonian botanist emeritus Stan Shetler.
Well, thank you so much for that
Absolutely.
illuminating presentation. I had no idea that there were so many oak species in the DMV and that hybridization was so common. When walking near Nora's house in Lacey Woods Park, I spotted something and I said, this doesn't look like any oak I know, so I'm sure it was one of those hybrids.
Oh, yeah.
But
Lacey
We
Woods
have a
is,
number
that's-
of questions in the chat, but one of the, I'd like to ask the first one. You talked about white oaks being a good upland tree. Why is it that northern reds and willow oaks are so favored as street trees? What makes them suited to
as
that?
they grow, they're tough. They, especially willow oak, willow oak as folks will, arborists will tell, or municipal arborists will tell you that overplanted, I love a tree and I like seeing a lot of them around. I mean, I wouldn't want to plant a monoculture, but they grow very well in those soils, the street tree soils, and in a lot of ways they're the mimic a floodplain in a way. You have these periods of flooding or inundation, and then you have just completely desiccation, and where it just turns to hardpan cracked clay. So that's not a bad, if a tree can tolerate that. That's why pin oaks were really popular as well. For that reason, they can take poor soils. They thrive in that. That's why they're popular as a street tree. Less so for northern red oak. There's a lot of northern red oak that's been replaced in urban areas. It is a street tree because it just it's partly because they're just too big for the small spots they're jamming them in.
I've seen some enormous ones
Yeah,
that buckle the sidewalks.
big time. Yep.
Okay, well, let's go to the chat. Catherine asks that she recently heard that oak leaf wilt is a problem. Have you seen much of that in this area?
It's around. It's more on northern red oak. It's around, but remember that it's not any one. If we connect if we restore connectivity between these oak dominated forests and each property that has oaks, it's cultivating oaks, takes care of the soil and the tree by taking care of the soil and properly as we've gone through. That gives the best protection against things that might emerge. You don't want to have trees flagged or out in the open, and those situations that once a tree is stressed, you find the pathogens and others will find them, and you start to see problems. Yeah, I've seen it around. But it's not an epidemic or anything that we need to race out and.
Kit asks whether smaller oaks should be caged to prevent deer browse, and Nora commented that she lost 4 oak seedling from mice and deer. So
Yeah, big time.
Caging them. Do you agree?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I mean, if you have deer are a problem, and they are for some folks, a lot of folks, definitely, you know, put the tree protector on them, those, you know, sleeve or something like to cage them. And definitely the lower one, the smaller ones, once they get to a certain size, so if they're knee high and they're a sapling, then you get a stout, you know, like a thicker than a pencil, but like your ring, you know, like your small finger, you know, width on a sapling. The deer will browse those in certain areas, but the rodents will not go after them. But squirrels and chipmunks are famous for just biting after the you know, even on a 2-year or maybe even a 2-year seedling that's 6 inches, 8 inches out of the ground, they'll just bite it off at the base and just leave it there, and chew a little bit out of the thing, but they'll just kill it off. So yeah, but after a while, you don't need to worry about the rodents. But the deer, you know, definitely, if they're a problem, they may just come in there and just graze it, you know, chew it. But I don't see a lot of that in the suburban areas with the deer.
Kathy asks, what is causing the damage to the oaks along Massachusetts Avenue in DC? And do you know what kind of oaks they are?
Well, they probably have a number of ones. That was in the paper not too long ago, and I don't know, you know, what's causing. I'm trying to remember what that article was about, but I think those were removed for a reason, but not for a disease. I think they were. I can't exactly remember the particulars, but that's a good question to send. I mean, Arlington County arborist Vince Verwaish will know that probably, as would City of Alexandria arborist John Marlin. They both live in DC, and they both, you know, I'm sure they know that what's going on with those.
We have Mary who asks about, I know your focus was on oaks, but do maples and oaks get along, and do they thrive in the same environments, or do maples really need different conditions?
A good question. You know, for years, everybody thought that the forest community in the East was the beech maple, you know, climax forest. And that's a northern thing. That's not, we don't have that community down here, where beech is naturally, beech goes with the Mesic mixed hardwood forest, and it's a stream, I call it a stream bank tree. Now it might be a big bank, it might be the Potomac River, you know, or a shell or a ravine or something like forest, but those are all banks. You know, ravines are stream banks. They could be 100 feet deep and still be a stream bank, but that's where the Mesic mixed forest is, and that's where these trees are. Red maple is a precocious tree. It does the same thing that black gum does in the upland oak forest. Both, so what you have here, which they do get along, but the oaks are the dominant canopy tree. The maple and the black gum will never compete with the oaks in the upland forest, but they will form very abundant understory where but they'll never, even if an oak goes down, that doesn't mean that the maple will never move up and fill in that space. It'll never compete with the other canopy oaks. So that's a good indication of what the community is. But red maple and the black gum, both almost in equal numbers, maybe black gum more commonly, are the understory in an oak heath forest, oftentimes, in a lot of them. So red maple really is a tree of seepage swamps, around bogs. It loves the seepage wetlands, and some swamps, swamp forests. That's where it really reaches its best characteristic growth and size. Silver maple is a tree of floodplains, not swamps so much, although it does grow in some swamp communities, but it really is a floodplain tree and reaches its best development and growth in those areas. So you wouldn't, that's why I wouldn't plant red maple, in a, because you really can't recreate a forest. So the goal is not trying to recreate, you're preserving remnant material and adding and enhancing it by good stewardship practices, mainly by keeping it as natural as possible. But that doesn't mean you're going to try to plant an understory of red maple and black gum under your oaks. That's not because in a homeowner situation, the black gum and the red maple, if they even survive, are going to be fighting. They're going to be growing in an odd way. They really, it's really apples and oranges.
Steve asks, he wants you to clarify your remark about leaf mulch causing harm to oak trees.
Oh, yes, thank you. The municipal leaf compost, the stuff that they vacuum up out of the gutters everywhere with the cigarette butts and the batteries and the plastics and all the junk, weed seeds by the billions, and then it's all ground up and into this big steamed compost pile, and that really is only good should only be used for vegetable gardens or for flower gardens. I don't mean native plant gardens. I mean, if people want to grow dahlias or whatever, these things, these heavy feeding plants. That stuff is great for that. If you just watch the weeds, because you're going to get everything from stilt grass to whatever, God knows what in there. That should never be used around in upland forest, because what you're doing is you're nutrient loading. It's a fertilizer, in short. It's not all that different from putting cow manure down or something like that. You just don't want to. You're changing your soil chemistry. Even in the city of Alexandria, one of our best management practices is not to use bluestone dust, or other non-native imported rock as a soil amendment. As a trail amendment, because you're changing the soil chemistry and you're bringing weeds in too. And once you change the soil chemistry and nutrify, guess what comes in? The nitrogen feeders that attack your tree, the pathogens that are following that nutrient loading and attacking the tree. Tree's got to fight all that stuff off at the root level and above. And you're also killing off the soil microorganisms big time, and feeding things like the exotic nuisance fauna like earthworms and such. You don't want any, it's ants that are a whole different fauna that supports these upland oak forests. So
I have a question. I appreciate your comments about having as natural a lawn as possible. And this was highlighted in the West, where the city of Las Vegas recently passed a ordinance that you cannot have a lawn that needs watering. You have to naturalize it, and people are having to rip up their beautiful green lawns in Las Vegas. But is the city of Alexandria planning to do anything to encourage people to naturalize their lawns? And if they did, would they run into opposition from the homeowners associations who demand that you have a green, perfect lawn?
Good question. A lot of jurisdictions everywhere are doing that. It's a different world. A few years ago, it was a big headache. A lot of people really worried about code enforcement and that sort of thing, zoning and everything. In Arlington County, back in the 90s, there was this native plant gardener who removed all the grass in his front yard, except for a little strip along the sidewalk, like an edging about maybe 18 inches wide. And he got around that by digging. He wanted to grow some things like cardinal flower and such. So he dug trenches in his front yard and just dumped peat moss bales in there, and he just sowed loads of cardinal flowers. He had this great sort of little wetland areas in there as well. And so he told any trouble that he had was, he just said, "This is a garden," but most jurisdictions have not only accept but actually promote ecological gardening practices, and they welcome that, and it goes with a lot of the programs that the extension and their own staff are spending a lot of time and energy on. So yeah, I haven't had seen really any problems. If you just stop mowing your grass and you don't, you let the property just go derelict, and then you just say, well, this is a natural, I'm just returning it to nature, then sure, there's gonna be some you'll get some guff there, but that's a whole different, that's example of someone trying to exploit the situation rather than work with it and with others. So I think these days most folks are okay with it. It doesn't mean that the code isn't still written and still on the books. It just means that nobody's, the times have changed, and we haven't just, no one's really gone back and rewritten the codes and such. But I don't think anyone's going to give folks in trouble for having an alternative native garden or lawn or forest regeneration area, whatever one wants to call it.
So we have a couple more mulch questions. Jackie asks if we shouldn't use leaf mulch from the city, what should we use? And Nora points out that Jim McGlone in Arlington says to mulch under tree from property line to property line rather than any grass. And so we have a lot of, but I think leaving leaves, that fall under trees is good. But, if you have, want to use mulch to suppress, grass and weeds from sprouting, do you suggest hardwood mulch rather than leaf mulch, or is any mulch a problem?
Yeah, those are all good points. I agree with, again, I agree with the concept of suppressing grass, and especially keeping away from not having to mow the grass, and also keeping away from the roots of the trees with a lawnmower, which is terribly destructive, of course, and then building up that organic soil horizon that's your living community there. It will also attract and grow a lot, act as a nursery for native species. And in some cases, the native species will reemerge from the seed bank, because a lot of them are still there. Not all of them, but some are. So not a lot of mulches are different. You certainly don't want to use the leaf compost. What I do is I grind up the leaves. I leave them fully, non-ground where I can, but not on areas that are windswept or open and grassy, because they're just going to bank there and get very thick, and you don't want them on so thick unless you're trying to kill something beneath it. But and you don't want them all just banked against a fence or someone's steps or whatever. So I try to distribute them evenly as much, and then I grind them, I shred them up with my mower in fall couple times, and leave them in the ground. That's the best so-called fertilizer that goes. You're returning the right material back into the ground. It also builds the soil structure nicely and feeds a lot of the soil microorganisms and that support the trees. And I'm really, I have old black oaks and an old Fontana oak in the backyard and such, and that's how you keep those alive. I'm really interested mostly in that. I don't really care about so much about what's flower gardening or anything like that. I do have those areas, but they fit in with the mulch. So I did kill a swath of grass on a slope. I was tired of mowing it. It was just pure weeds anyway. It was liriope and Dutch white clover, some of the worst weeds that are around. It was, so I used a recyclable those brown paper lawn leaf bags. I cut them open and opened them up, and I would take ground up leaves, oak leaves, and put them down a couple inches thick. And I would put on top of the weed grass, and then put the paper down on that, the brown recyclable paper. And then on top of that, I'd got bags of pine bark mulch, shredded pine bark mulch, which is the best to use because it's inert and it doesn't change the chemistry. Shredded hardwood mulch you wouldn't want to use that. I mean, it smells horrible, it looks horrible for one thing, but it packs in there like a paper mache, and it produces lignins and I mean it changes the soil chemistry over time and stresses the plants. So, and pine is a good byproduct of the lumber industry, and it's why I sent it to waste. I would never use cypress mulch because they're clearing cypress communities for that old cypress. And I would never use eastern red cedar mulch or these dyed gas station kind of mulches that you see it, like colored mulches and stuff. You don't want to use that. Some of that stuff is just ground up packing crates and junk construction, lumber and stuff that they just dye to make it look like like a mulch, but it's
Right.
junk. So
Yeah.
that's what I would use.
Thanks. Were you aware that Montgomery County is giving a tax rebate on your water quality protection charge to replace lawn with conservation landscaping? Is this something Alexandria might consider, or too many battles?
Montgomery County is a better leader in that they're not so hampered with the Dillon rule, or at least what elected officials like to hide behind by citing the Dillon rule in Virginia as to why we can't get anything done here. Montgomery County passes a lot of stuff that like that, and they're much more innovative and progressive than we are. Not always, people aren't always, they're certainly not always popular across the board, but it's a step in the right direction. Some other things they do, such as stream restorations, they're among the very worst in the mid-Atlantic region in Montgomery County, just horrendous in places you wouldn't expect them. So there is a schizophrenic kind of a thing, but you know, you'll find some jurisdictions in Virginia do a better job on some things than Montgomery, but yeah, it's moving towards more drought tolerant, so-called maintenance-free native landscapes is important, and great way to connect semi-natural or urbanized areas to natural areas. But once again, we have to always, you know, keep right plant, right place, and the same concept of do no harm and keeping it natural govern, you know, things like native plant gardens as well.
Rod, when we were emailing back and forth, you mentioned you were going to look into a place where you might be able to take people on a walk to show off some of our area's oak diversity. Have you identified a place that has a really good variety of oaks?
Yes, there's just depends what, I mean, it could be in Arlington or Alexandria Park, or do one of each, you know, just one, you know, just a month apart or however that works. There's a number of parks in close in that would be really good for that, or wouldn't have to go very far. You know, Arlington County has a couple nice spots. City of Alexandria as well. We've given, you know, a number of folks a regular field trip spots from the master naturalist or the tree stewards anyway. And it's difficult to find in one park most of these things, and some of them are on the edges and such, but yeah, there's some good sites. So if you think that that's something that folks would like, I'd be happy to just send you and Nora you know, half a dozen from each of those jurisdictions, you know, to go. And you know, if we do it earlier than later in the season, you know, like preferably this month, there's places like Real Serpentine Barrens, which is really rare, forested serpentine barrens, which is exceptionally rare. Not a lot of oak hybrids there, but you'll find that same community that I showed from the Ozarks. It's shortleaf pine is co-dominant there with post oak, but you also have other oaks there as well. And that's a great site. It's just a couple miles west of the village of Potomac, at the end of Falls Road there, or at least where Falls Road. It's an easy drive from Arlington County, and it's, you know, Lucy Braun stopped by there in the 40s with her sister. You know, just when they checked out a lot of forest communities in the east, and it's got a lot of history. It's a great site, and that was preserved at the county level. Nobody else wanted to deal with it, and Montgomery County, to its great credit, just got the place preserved, and it's an old age forest community there.
Well, thank you so much, Rob,
Absolutely.
for sharing your wealth of knowledge and expertise on oaks and preserving our natural environments. And I will poll our group to see how many people would be interested in a forest walk at some point. But thank you again.
Sure, absolutely.
We will sign off.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And thanks to our participants for joining us tonight.